What would you do if you were treated as a suspect just because of the color of your skin? Coco Jones was only sitting in her car, minding her own business, when the flashing red and blue lights appeared in her rearview mirror. At first, she thought it was a routine stop, maybe a misunderstanding that would clear up in seconds. But as the officer stepped out of his cruiser and walked toward her, there was something in his eyes, cold, dismissive, and already filled with judgment. He didn't see Coco Jones, the woman, the professional, the human being. He only saw the color of her skin. The moment she rolled down her window, his tone shifted from authority to arrogance. His words weren't questions, they were accusations. And before Coco could even understand why he stopped her, before she could defend herself, his hand moved to his holster. In an instant, the gun was out, aimed directly at her, and the smirk on his face told her everything. This was no mistake. This was a cop who thought he could use his power, his weapon, and his prejudice to intimidate a black woman sitting alone in her car. Her breath caught in her throat. The world outside kept moving. Cars passed by, people walked the sidewalks. But for Coco, time froze in the exact moment that cold metal was pointed at her chest. Coco Jones sat behind the wheel of her sleek black car, her posture calm yet commanding. She was an elegant black woman with a quiet confidence that turned heads wherever she went. The soft glow of the streetlights reflected off the polished hood as the evening settled into silence. It was one of those nights when the streets felt almost too quiet. The kind of silence that made small sounds echo louder than they should. Coco adjusted her rearview mirror, unaware that a pair of headlights had been trailing her. Suddenly, the flashing red and blue lights erupted behind her, shattering the calm. She pulled over smoothly, her hands steady on the steering wheel. But the way the patrol car screeched to a stop behind her carried an aggression she could already feel. Heavy footsteps approached, fast and deliberate, and within moments the officer was at her window. He didn't ask for her license, he didn't explain the stop. Instead, suspicion was painted across his face, as if her very presence offended him. His voice cut sharp through the night, demanding answers with hostility instead of courtesy. Then came the chilling moment. His hand moved to his holster. Before Coco could even understand why he stopped her, before she could defend herself, his hand moved to his holster. In an instant, the gun was out, aimed directly at her, and the smirk on his face told her everything. This was no mistake. This was a cop who thought he could use his power, his weapon, and his prejudice to intimidate a black woman sitting alone in her car. The officer strutted toward Coco's car with a swagger that spoke of unchecked arrogance. His flashlight beamed into her window, even though the street was already well lit, as if he wanted to blind her into submission. Without even greeting her, he barked, "What are you doing driving this car? You don't look like you belong here." His voice carried the sharp edge of disdain, coated in the smug superiority of someone who thought his badge made him untouchable. Coco rested her hands calmly on the steering wheel, her expression unreadable. She didn't respond right away, which only seemed to fuel her irritation. He leaned closer, his lip curling into a sneer. "Don't just sit there staring at me. Step out of the vehicle, now." When she remained composed, he tapped his hand against his holster, enjoying the display of intimidation. Then, in a dramatic move meant to instill fear, he pulled his gun and pointed it directly at her. A cruel smirk spread across his face as he tilted his head, mocking her with false authority. He chuckled low under his breath, a laugh that revealed how much he relished the illusion of power. Inside the car, Coco's chest rose with slow, controlled breaths. On the surface, she looked calm, almost serene. But beneath that calm, her silence carried weight. She wasn't powerless, and she wasn't alone in this world. The cop thought he was in control, but what he didn't realize was that Coco's connections reached far beyond anything he could imagine. Coco's mind drifts for a moment, not out of fear, but out of memory. She remembers growing up in a world that never made things easy for her. As a young black girl, she had to fight for every bit of respect, for every chance to be heard. She faced harsh words, doubting eyes, and endless walls built to stop her progress. But she never broke. Each insult, each barrier only made her stronger. She carried herself with grace, even when the world tried to strip it away. Her journey was never simple. She battled discrimination head-on, pushing back against every hand that tried to silence her. Through talent and relentless determination, she rose to success as an actress, carving a name for herself that inspired countless others. She wasn't just famous, she was a symbol, someone who turned pain into power. That is why, as the officer's gun points at her, there is no fear in her eyes. She knows something he doesn't. His weapon is nothing compared to the strength she carries within. Power doesn't come from intimidation, it comes from resilience, and she has mastered it. Coco slowly reaches for her phone, but not to plead, not to show weakness. Instead, it is for one call, one voice on the other end that could turn this entire encounter upside down. And as her fingers hover over the screen, the calm in her eyes becomes more unsettling than fear ever could be. The cop's grip on the gun tightened as he sneered, his voice dripping with arrogance. He leaned closer and said, "People like you don't belong here." His words weren't just a threat. They were meant to humiliate, to remind her of every wall society had tried to build against her. The crowd that had gathered fell silent, unsure if they were about to witness something unthinkable. Coco didn't flinch. Her calmness only made his mockery louder. "What are you going to do?" he taunted, smirking as if the situation was already in his control. "Who do you think you are?" He expected fear. He expected her to beg. Instead, she pulled out her phone, not to record, not to plead for help, but to make one single call. Her voice didn't waver as she spoke into the phone. The cop chuckled under his breath, shaking his head like she was foolish. "Go ahead, sweetheart. Call whoever you want. You think anyone's gonna show up for you?" His arrogance echoed in the air, feeding off the tension. But Coco knew exactly who she was, and she knew exactly who would answer. The seconds stretched as he laughed and mocked, completely unaware that his power was slipping through his fingers. Then her calm eyes met his, and she said quietly, "You'll regret underestimating me." What happened next silenced everyone watching. Within minutes, the sound of sirens cut through the air, growing louder with every passing second. Multiple police cars pulled up to the scene, lights flashing, doors flying open. The racist cop's smug grin began to fade as he realized these were not his allies arriving to back him up. Instead, they were higher-ranking authorities, faces stern and focused as they stepped onto the street. The crowd that had gathered went silent, their eyes fixed on the unfolding confrontation. The officer who had been laughing at Coco just moments ago now stood frozen, his hand slowly dropping from his holster. Confusion flickered across his face, quickly replaced by something far more unsettling: fear. Then the commanding officer approached. The air shifted as he walked directly past the aggressive cop without so much as a glance, heading straight toward Coco. His expression softened instantly, and in front of everyone watching, he greeted her with unmistakable respect. The crowd gasped. The officer who had mocked her for not belonging here was now forced to watch as his superior recognized her with honor. It was in that instant he understood. This woman he had tried to belittle was no ordinary civilian. She was someone with powerful connections, someone his badge could not shield him from. The realization washed over him too late. His arrogance had pushed him over the edge, and there was no turning back. In just 2 minutes, the tables turned completely. The officer's gun was stripped from his hand in one swift motion. For a second, he looked stunned, as if his world had been flipped upside down. His voice broke into loud protests, yelling about authority, law, and respect, but no one was listening anymore. The badge that once gave him power meant nothing in this moment. Fellow officers surrounded him, and the same men who once stood by his side now moved in to restrain him. Handcuffs clicked around his wrists, and the weight of steel cut deeper than any punishment he had imagined. His arrogance collapsed with every passing second. He twisted, shouted, and demanded someone believe him, but the street stayed silent except for the sound of chains locking him in place. Coco stood quietly by her car, her posture calm, her gaze unwavering. She didn't raise her voice, didn't lash out, didn't need to prove anything. Her strength was written in the way she carried herself, in the fact that she hadn't flinched even when a gun was pointed at her head. She represented more than herself. She stood for dignity, for every silent moment others had endured in fear. The sight was almost poetic. The same hand that had tightened around the trigger was now sealed in iron. The balance of power had shifted completely, and the man who thought he could control her fate was now stripped of his own. Justice was finally served. The cop who thought his badge and his gun made him untouchable was led away in handcuffs, his career and arrogance destroyed in a single night. But while the scene brought closure, it was also a reminder that the roots of racism run deep, and battles like this are fought every day by people who are judged before they are even known. Coco stood tall, her presence unshaken. Looking at the officers around her, she spoke with calm strength. Never mistake silence for weakness, and never mistake dignity for fear. You can try to break us, but we will always rise. Her words cut through the night like a promise, one that carried the weight of generations who endured and still overcame. As the sirens faded, the truth stood clear. Hate may roar loudly, but it never outlasts justice. Strength, courage, and truth will always find a way to shine through. Now it is your turn to reflect. What would you have done if you witnessed this moment? Share your thoughts in the comments. Let others hear this story by sharing it, and make sure to subscribe so you never miss the lessons behind the battles that matter.